Welcome to my second video on how to use the AB grid in my series on learning to use 3D LUT Creator. Now today we're going to be splitting the grid into the shadow and highlight portion, and we're also going to be doing a number of other interesting things with it. If you haven't had the opportunity to watch my first video, the introduction to the AB grid, or if you'd like a review before jumping into this one, I'm going to leave a link to that video up above. And of course you can see all the videos in this series by checking out my 3D LUT Creator playlist. I would like to ask you one favor though. If you find content like this useful, I'd really appreciate your support by having you click on that subscribe button below, and if you turn on notifications you won't miss any of the videos in this series. Thanks. Let's get started. So we're going to jump right in here, and in the last video, part 1 of the AB grid, I mentioned that we'd be covering this double tab, which splits the grid into shadow and highlights. So let's take a look at what we can do with that. I'm going to come down here, and in Photoshop, I have this photograph. And the greens are sort of bland, and I thought that if I made these bright tips of the green grasses a little orange or yellowish, it might impart more of a feel of fall and give a little more interest to the photo. So let's go ahead back to 3D LUT Creator and bring this photograph in. And as we saw last time, we just have to click Image from Photoshop. And it brings the photo right in. So if I were to take my cursor and run it over the green tips of the grasses, we can see what spoke that color is on. But now if I were to bring it down to the darker grasses, we see that the point moves, showing that this green is more saturated, but it's on the same spoke. And so what that means is if I took this spoke and moved it, all the grasses are going to turn sort of fall, dried out color looking. So let's reset that again. Here's the Reset tab. When we talk about selecting, we can try selecting certain of these points, but they're very close together, and so it's going to be hard to separate out these tips from the rest of the grasses. So last time we spoke about this double tab. So I'm going to click on the double tab, and that splits the grid into two. And one grid will control the shadows, and one grid will control the highlights. How do you tell which one is which? Well, 3D LUT Creator has this little trick that it uses for a lot of different things, which is to say slightly different tones and brightness. So if you look carefully at these two grids, this grid here, the colors here are a little darker than the colors here and here, or at any of the corners. And what that indicates is that this is the grid that is going to control the shadows, and this is the grid that is going to control the highlights. Now, let's take my cursor and run it over the tips. And you can see that the color underneath the cursor is on this one particular spoke in the highlight grid. If we were to come down here and run the cursor over the grasses, you see that the color, just like when the grid was 1, the color's on the same spoke, but it's now on the shadow grid, which says that we can make those adjustments separately. But let's say we want to really know what colors are going to be affected when we move any spoke on the highlight or shadow grid. Well, similar to the way I demonstrated in part 1 of the AB grid video, we can come to any point here, hold down the Alt key, and left click. And that's going to show us which colors are selected. Likewise, if I come here to the highlight grid, it will show us what colors are affected. But as you can see, the split, it may not be exactly where we want it in terms of separating the highlights and shadows, because if we were to move this highlight coloration, we see not only do the grasses change at the tips, but we have changes here and changes in the trees, changes over here that we might not want. But luckily there is a slider right here that lets us control what the software considers shadows and what it considers highlights. So how do we tell what it's considering, highlight and shadow? Now, the first thing you have to do is to try to think a little bit like 3D LUT Creator. And just like I pressed Alt and left click here to show what colors were affected, and in that case the answer is none, we can put our cursor over this slider, hold down Alt, and press the left key, and we see what the shadows and the highlights are at this setting. So the orange indicates highlights and the blue indicates shadows. And if we let go, we can see what part of the image is affected. So again, at this setting, we're affecting this, but also a lot of other areas of the image, as we saw when we made that move and we had all sorts of changes of colors and various screens that we didn't want. So this slider will adjust the pivot point of what is considered shadow and highlights. So therefore, if I were to move it down, it's telling the program that more should be considered highlights. If I were to move it up, it's telling the program that the shadows should move into what we previously called highlights. Rather than try to explain it, it's much easier to demonstrate. So if I'm holding down Alt and left clicking on the button, and I move it downwards, more of the image should be considered highlights. And as you can see, that's exactly what's happening. More and more of the image is becoming highlights. If I move it to here at the original setting and I move it up, more and more of the image should be considered shadow. And you can see that happening as the blue starts encroaching more and more on the orange. So in our case, we would like to limit what the highlights are. And we can make an adjustment like this, which limits, we have to sort of decide what we're going to take here, which is going to limit any changes to, yes, there's some in here, but there'll be a very smooth transition. And let's just see what happens if we set the slider here. We can check which spoke contains our highlights, and it is that one in the highlight grid. And we can now take this spoke and move it and make the tip of those grasses look drier without changing the bottom portion of the grasses. We can saturate it a bit more. Moreover, once this is set, if we don't like the exact demarcation of shadow and highlight, we can come back here to this slider. And by simply shifting the slider around, we can see what the effect in real time would be. And this looks pretty good. There's still some changes here, so we may want to go higher to get rid of some of those changes. And there we have the tips of the grasses looking more dried out. Now, how can you tell what you've done in 3D LUT Creator? Is there a before and after? Well, there is, and in fact, there's several ways to do that. And I think this is a good time to show you how to look at the before and after, what your effect has been. And these particular things I'm going to show you are good for any grid, any place in the software. So the first way is you'll notice that each of these tabs have this little button. They sort of look like Lightroom buttons. And I've made a change here in the AB grid, and this button is up. So very similar to Lightroom, if I click on that button, it slides down, and what I've done in that grid goes away. So this is the before, this is the after. Now, doing that will just turn off this particular grid. So if you've made changes to other tabs, it's not going to turn those other tabs off. It's just going to show you what you did with this particular tab. But there are ways, 2 ways in particular, to see what you've done before and after in total by turning all the tabs on and off at once. The first way, just like you compare in Lightroom by pressing C, is the shortcut. If I press C on my keyboard, I get a before and an after, so you can see all the changes that you've made. Press C again, and that goes away. If you'd rather not see it split screen like that, the backslash, I always get confused which backslash is which, but the one right under the backspace key, if you hit the backslash key, you'll notice this says before, and you can see our changes are gone. And if I hit the backslash key again, it takes the before away, and our changes are there. Also, we can actually turn on and off the individual adjustments we made in the highlight and shadow portions of the grid by clicking on the icon. So for example, here is the sun for the highlights, and if we click on that, you'll notice that the sun goes out, and the changes that we made in the highlights using this highlight grid are no longer apparent. If we click back on the sun, it turns back on, and it turns back on the changes we've made in our highlight grid. The same is true for the shadow grid by turning it on and off, but of course we can't see any changes in the image because we haven't made any changes in the shadow grid here. One last thing this looks like a good time to mention it. If we go to Window, History, and it tells you what the shortcut is, Control H, it pulls up a history window. So you might have been wondering, can you go back step by step just like in Photoshop? And the answer is yes. You can see every step that we've done along the way here. So if you wanted to go back to the beginning, before we did anything, there you go. And we can go step by step and show all the changes we've done in the video so far, pick any of those points, and decide we can leave it there. So, for example, if we wanted to go back to the beginning with one grid, if I turn this off, there we are. If you decide that you want to pull up that tab later, you can. All the changes are still saved, and we can go to the current state. Now, as we've done before, if we come here and click on LUT to Photoshop, it will bring our LUT adjustment layer right to the top of the stack. And if we turn it on and off, we can see the changes. Now, there are ways to do masking within 3D LUT Creator. We're going to talk about that in a later video. But just for simplicity, let's say you didn't like this change here. Well, you know, this is Photoshop. You can select the brush tool. You can select a black brush. You can make your opacity 100% if you'd like. And you can just brush some of those changes out. Likewise here. And we have very intuitively changed the tips of our grasses to look a little bit more like fall. And if you think that's a little too much, we can, of course, change the opacity. And we have a very natural looking effect there, I think. So let's go back to 3D LUT Creator for a moment and reset our grid to a single grid, and let's reset that grid. Now, we have to talk about point selection. I mentioned in the last video that we were going to talk about that. Again, it's not the sexiest thing in the world, but it's important if you're going to control color in a very selective fashion. So let's talk about points. I actually find that points are even more important in the CL grid than here, but now's a good time to introduce the concept. First, let's show how they work, and then we can talk a little bit about why you might want to use them. There's basically 3 things you can do with points on a grid. You can pin them, you can select them, and you can move them either singly or in a group. Let's start with single points. A pinned point, such as this one, is a bit bigger than the unpinned points you see here. And in the AB grid, the grid starts out with all the endpoints of the spoke being pinned, as is the neutral point. The reason being, you generally don't want to move those points unless you move them. What do I mean by this? First, let's select the point. You select the point by left-clicking or clicking on it in a Mac, and then you hold your mouse button down and drag it. So you can see I'm still holding the left mouse button down and dragging, and you can see that all the unpinned neighbors travel with the pinned point that I am moving. Now what happens if I were to select this point? Well, when you select a point, it becomes automatically pinned. Let's select that point, and let's select that point. So all these 3 points are pinned. Now, if I take this point and move it by holding my mouse button down and dragging, the pinned points don't move because I'm not moving them, but the unpinned points do move. Now let's say I move this point here and wanted to reset it or unpin it. How do I do that? Well, in a Windows machine, I just right-click on it and it resets the point. In a Mac, I command-click on it. Here's an unselected point. If I right-click on that, it will be unpinned. I can't unpin a point that is already selected, but if I unselect that point, I can right-click and unpin it. Okay, I can hear what you're saying. Are you kidding me? It sounds confusing, but really, if you just play with it, you'll get it in 10 minutes. You just have to play with it and go through and select and deselect points, and you'll get used to it very quickly. It's really much harder to describe than to just do. And remember, you can't break anything. You can always just step back in the history panel if something doesn't act the way you want it to. Okay, let's talk about selecting and moving multiple points. So there are several ways that we can select multiple points at once. Let's reset that. So the first way is to control, I'm holding down the control button on my Windows machine, and click. And you can see that as I control click, multiple points are selected at once. I'm going to reset that. Oh, good point. You can only reset the grid if there's only one point selected. So I'm resetting that. A second way to choose multiple points is very similar to Photoshop in drawing a marquee grid. So what I'm doing is I'm going to hold down my left mouse button and just draw a grid. And when I let go of my left mouse button, all the points within the grid will be selected. I'm going to reset that grid. And finally, there's another way to choose multiple points. I'm going to select this point, and on my Windows machine, I'm going to hold down Control, Shift, and then I can use my arrow keys, and any direction in which I press the arrow key, the point will be selected. So I'm going to press the down key, I'm going to press the left key, I'm going to press the up key, and I'm going to press the right key, and I have selected all those points. So, selected points, big deal. Well, the issue is, once the points are selected, anytime I move any point, they will all move together and maintain their spatial relationship. In addition, another way to move any group of selected points, or even a single selected point, is with your arrow key. So I'm moving them left, right, up, and down. That's if you just want to make more minor adjustments to them. But why? Why would you want to do all this? It's actually much more apparent when you select multiple points on the CL grid, but there are reasons to select multiple points on the AB grid as well. So let's show some reasons why we might want to choose multiple points. I've brought a new image here into 3D LUT Creator. So these grasses in the front of the image, you can see where they are on the grid. And let's say I just wanted to try to affect the color or saturation of these grasses, but not the yellow in the trees, which is on the same spoke, but more saturated up here. Well, what I could do is I could pin that point, and I could draw a marquee and select multiple points that would represent these grasses and move them in unison to either desaturate the grasses. I can make the grasses somewhat greener. I can make them, well, we don't want to make them red, but we can make them a little yellower. We can saturate them a bit more, all without necessarily having any really significant effect on the tree because I've pinned all of this. So let's make them a little greener just for the sake of this demonstration. Now up here we have some blues in the mountains. Let's say I wanted to simplify and move all those blues, shift one way or another. I could take all the blue spokes here. I could draw a marquee, which would select both of them. I could bring them to this blue spoke, draw a marquee, which would adjust all of them. And we could make the mountains in the background less blue. Green is sort of ugly. We can add a little red. We can do whatever we want to those mountains in the background by moving all those spokes together and really not affecting a whole lot else. Now, if we want to deselect, the easiest way to deselect all the points is just to hit Control D, and all the points on the grid will be reselected. Well, we really covered a lot today, and I know that the use of those points sounds very confusing, but it really is more difficult to describe than to do. And I'm sure if you just take 5 or 10 minutes and work with them on the grid, you'll have the hang of how to use them in no time. It really is not difficult at all. It's the description that sounds confusing. Next week, we're going to be starting with an introduction to the CL grid, which is another very powerful tool in 3D LUT Creator. If you want to see the rest of the videos in this series, on the end screen, I'm going to leave a link to them. In the meantime, if you find this content useful, I'd really appreciate your subscribing to the channel by clicking on the link below. We'll see you next time.